I'm 32, and my younger sister Claire is 26. We grew up with the typical big sibling, little sibling dynamic, but it wasn't always smooth sailing. Our parents, especially Mom, had high standards for both of us, but with Claire, they always acted like she was a bit more delicate, like she needed extra cushioning. Back when we were younger, I didn't think much of it. It just seemed normal, like that's how families work. But the older we got, the more obvious it became. Claire was clearly the favorite. We're a tight-knit bunch, Sunday dinners, group texts, birthday calls, but just because we're close doesn't mean things don't get messy. My parents have always had that we know best attitude. Once they've made up their minds about something, there's no changing it. It's not that they don't care, far from it. It's just that they're convinced they always know what's right, especially when it comes to Claire. They've practically mapped out her life for her, job, lifestyle, everything. It's been that way since she finished college. She wanted to take a step back, explore her interests, figure out what she really wanted. But our parents had a different plan. They wanted her in a stable job ASAP, something they could proudly mention at dinner parties or show off in Christmas letters. Lately, Claire's been looking more worn down than ever. It's like she's stuck between chasing what she wants and living up to what they expect. Whenever we talk, I can hear the strain in her voice. She tries to keep things peaceful, avoid any kind of confrontation. That's always been her way. And honestly, I think that's part of why our parents favor her so much. She doesn't push back, not directly anyway. But when it's just the two of us, the mask slips. She opens up. She cries. She vents. And she admits she feels trapped under the weight of their expectations. A few weeks ago, she stopped by my place. The moment she walked in, I could tell something was off. Dark circles under her eyes, slouched posture, like she hadn't had a full night's rest in days. We flopped down on the couch, and she just started talking. About how out of control everything felt. About how Mom and Dad wouldn't ease up on her about figuring out her future. At first, I thought she just needed to unload like usual. But then she hit me with something unexpected. She asked me to be the one to confront our parents. She wanted me to be the bad guy in all of this. Her plan was that if I brought it up, if I spoke for her, maybe our parents would finally take it seriously. She figured if the concern came from me, it wouldn't sound like complaining. It'd sound serious. And I could see her logic. She thought Mom and Dad might actually pay attention if they believed I was worried about her well-being. But at the same time, it felt like she was asking me to step into the fire for her, to challenge them while she stayed safely out of the blast zone. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there, trying to wrap my head around what she was asking of me. It's not like I didn't want to help her. She's my sister, of course I care. But I also knew exactly how our parents operate. They'd see it as a betrayal, like I was turning against them after everything they'd done for us. I remembered a time a few years ago when I tried to speak up for her over something much smaller. It blew up in my face. Mom gave me the cold shoulder for nearly a month, and Dad kept dropping these passive-aggressive comments about how disappointed he was in me. And yet, looking at Claire, sitting on my couch like she had the world on her shoulders, it was hard to turn her down. She wasn't asking for kicks. She looked genuinely at the end of her rope. She kept repeating that she just couldn't take it anymore, but didn't know how else to get through to them. And, honestly, I could see it. She was unraveling. After sitting in silence for what felt like forever, I nodded. I told her I'd give it a shot, try talking to our parents in a way that might actually get through to them. So a few days later, I invited them over to my apartment for dinner. They showed up smiling, probably expecting just another relaxed family evening. But deep down, I knew I had to get right to it. I eased into it by casually bringing up that Claire had seemed a little stressed lately. Tried to keep it light, like I was just making conversation. But the second I mentioned how much pressure she felt about her career, the energy in the room shifted hard. Mom's smile turned stiff, and Dad gave me this confused look, like he couldn't believe I was even saying this. Things went downhill fast. Mom immediately jumped to saying I was making a big deal out of nothing, brushing it off as Claire just going through a typical young adult funk. Dad, who's usually the calmer one, looked hurt. Like he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that I'd take Claire's side instead of theirs. They both insisted they were only trying to guide her, to keep her from making choices she might regret. But from their point of view, me stepping in was an act of betrayal, like I was challenging their judgment. I tried to explain that it wasn't about picking sides. I was just concerned about my sister, but they weren't having it. And what hurt the most was that Claire, the one I did all this for, stayed quiet. She didn't speak up once. She sat there poking at her food, eyes down, not offering a single word of support. It felt like I was thrown to the wolves while she watched from the sidelines. After they left, the silence in my apartment felt crushing. Claire finally said something, but instead of thanking me, she looked uneasy, even slightly upset. She asked if I thought maybe I'd gone overboard, if I'd twisted her words somehow. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I did exactly what she'd asked, but now she was pulling away from it. It was painfully obvious that the divide between all of us had just gotten wider. My parents were furious with me, Claire was uncertain, and I was left feeling like I'd just set fire to the bridge between us all. I told her I was only trying to help, but she didn't seem convinced. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely alone in my own family. Update 1. The morning after that dinner, I woke up to a flood of missed calls and angry texts from Mom. She was clearly livid. I didn't reply right away, figured maybe if I gave it some space it'd die down. But by noon, she was banging on my door. And Dad wasn't far behind her. They didn't waste a second. They barged in, full of accusations, saying I'd stirred up trouble for no good reason, that I'd created a mess where there was none. Mom kept repeating that I'd crossed a line, that I'd only made things harder for Claire instead of helping. I tried to tell them I was just trying to support her, that she was struggling and needed someone in her corner. But they shut that down quick. According to them, I was overreaching. They talked like Claire didn't need rescuing, just a bit of a shove in the right direction. It was like they truly believed I was out to damage their relationship with her, which couldn't have been further from the truth. But every time I tried to say anything, they just kept raising their voices, cutting me off like I didn't have a right to speak on family matters. Claire sat quietly on the couch the whole time, eyes glued to her hands while our parents tore into me. I kept glancing over, hoping she'd chime in, maybe say even a few words to back me up, but she didn't. She kept her head down and stayed silent. That silence hit harder than anything they said. It felt like I was standing there, taking all the heat for something we had agreed on together. And when my parents finally left, they didn't slam the door, but honestly, it felt like they had. After that, I realized I needed to draw some lines for my own peace of mind, if nothing else. I made the decision that I wouldn't step into the middle of family drama like that again unless it was absolutely necessary. I still wanted to be there for Claire, but I wasn't about to keep throwing myself into the fire without a solid reason. It was the only way I could avoid another blow-up like that. That night, I posted something vague online, just a short message about feeling misunderstood and stuck in a tough spot. It wasn't aimed at anyone, more like a way to vent. But of course, people read into it. Messages started rolling in from friends and family, asking if I was okay. Some offered support, others gave me advice I didn't ask for. A few told me I should just apologize to keep the peace. Others took my side, saying it was right to stand up for Claire and that someone needed to say the hard things. It felt like I'd accidentally stirred up a storm, and now everyone had something to say about it. A couple days later, Mom called. At first, I thought maybe she wanted to patch things up, but that wasn't it. She launched straight into scolding me for posting anything about our family, even though I never mentioned names. She said I should know better, that it wasn't my place to air dirty laundry, even vaguely. She kept going, saying I needed to stay in my lane and let them deal with Claire's future the way they saw fit. It was like she'd forgotten every time they'd leaned on me in the past to help mediate when things got tense. Now, suddenly, I was the bad guy for trying to help. Dad eventually got on the line too, backing her up word for word. They both made it clear, moving forward, they expected me to butt out. Meanwhile, Claire started to drift. She didn't answer my texts as quickly, and when I asked her to meet up for coffee, she brushed it off, saying she needed time to think. It was hard not to take it personally. I started feeling like she regretted ever involving me in the first place. It was a weird shift. Just a week ago, we were talking almost daily. Now, I barely heard from her. The silence made me start questioning everything, whether I'd done the right thing at all. Feeling like I was spiraling, I reached out to my best friend, Tessa. She's always been the one to give it to me straight. We met up, and I laid it all out: Claire's request, the dinner, the fallout with my parents. She listened quietly, then hit me with something I hadn't even considered. "Do you think you're enabling her?" she asked. The question stopped me cold. Tessa said maybe Claire needed to figure out how to stand up for herself instead of always relying on me to be her shield. That perspective stuck with me. It wasn't something I wanted to hear, but maybe it was something I needed to. A few days later, I tried to reach out to Claire again. I showed up at her place, hoping we could talk things through. She opened the door, but didn't ask me in. She looked worn down, like all this had taken just as much of a toll on her as it had on me. I asked if we could talk. She shook her head and said she needed space. That she just wasn't in a place to deal with everything right now. Her words stung, but I tried not to let it show. I told her I understood, that I'd give her the time she needed, and left. But as I walked away, it felt like I was losing my sister little by little. About a week later, we had a family gathering at my aunt's place. I went, thinking maybe things had cooled off a bit and we could all reset. But it turned out to be more of the same. My parents were there, and they didn't hold back. I overheard them telling my aunt and a couple cousins that I'd overstepped big time. It didn't take long before I started picking up on whispers, people saying I should have stayed out of it, that I'd only made things worse for everyone. Suddenly, I wasn't the helpful older brother, I was the villain in their story. All I'd done was try to help, and now I was the one being painted as the problem. By the end of the night, I knew something had to change. I made up my mind to call for a real family sit-down. Me, Claire, our parents, everyone at the same table. I've never been one to take charge in these situations, but I figured if I didn't do it, nobody else would. I just hoped that this time, we could finally talk things through and get on the same page. Update 2. I managed to schedule the family meeting for the next weekend, back at my apartment. It wasn't easy convincing everyone, especially Claire. When I first mentioned the idea, she didn't look too thrilled. She was nervous that it'd just turn into another blowout, that we'd all end up yelling instead of actually listening. But I told her it was time. We couldn't keep dancing around the tension. Eventually, she agreed, though she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. When Saturday came around, the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. My parents showed up first, stiff and silent, arms folded like they were bracing for battle. Claire came a few minutes later, hesitating in the doorway before joining us in the living room. No one wanted to be the first to speak, so I took a deep breath and broke the silence. I told them I cared about our family, that I missed how things used to be when we actually got along. I said I hated how far things had spiraled and that everyone deserved to feel heard. Mom's face didn't change much, her expression stayed sharp, and Dad just gave me a quick nod. Claire watched me but stayed quiet, clearly unsure of where this was going. And then, right on cue, Mom jumped in. She said I had stirred up trouble by dragging Claire's issues into the spotlight. That everything was just fine until I decided to meddle. Dad chimed in too, saying I should focus on my own life and stop trying to fix things that weren't broken. Their defensiveness filled the room like static. It was obvious they thought this whole mess was my fault. I did my best to keep calm. I told them I wasn't trying to challenge their parenting or make them look bad. I just wanted to help Claire, and she had come to me for support. But talking to them felt like shouting into a tunnel. The words echoed, but nothing landed. No matter what I said, my parents kept twisting it around like I was blaming them for everything that had gone wrong. Then, out of nowhere, Claire finally found her voice. Her words were shaky, but she didn't stop. She confessed that she'd been feeling stuck for a long time, that trying to live up to what they wanted was wearing her down. She said the pressure felt suffocating, like she couldn't even catch her breath some days. For a moment, the whole room just froze. No one had anything to say. That's when I brought up why we were really there, that night when Claire had asked me to speak to them on her behalf. I saw the surprise flash across our parents' faces. You could tell they hadn't even considered that I might have been doing this at her request. Claire nodded and backed me up. She said she didn't know how else to get through to them. It was a raw moment, but it felt like, for the first time in a long time, we were all actually being real with each other. And then, something I never expected happened. Our parents, especially Dad, began to open up too. They admitted they'd been worried. Scared, even. Dad said he was afraid that Claire, not having a clear career path, might set her up for a hard life. Mom shared that she couldn't relate to Claire's uncertainty. It reminded her too much of her own fear and confusion when she was young. It clearly wasn't easy for them to open up like that, but hearing them say it gave me a better understanding of where they were coming from. Of course, all that honesty also stirred up some big emotions. Mom got choked up, saying everything they'd done had come from love. And Dad raised his voice, going on about how hard he'd worked to make sure we had opportunities. Claire snapped back, saying that their love just felt like pressure and control. It got loud, tense. At one point, Claire stood up like she was ready to leave, but I convinced her to stay. After all the shouting, after all the built-up tension spilled out, we started talking about boundaries, real ones. I told them Claire needed the freedom to make her own decisions, even if that meant making a few mistakes along the way. Dad looked uncomfortable, but eventually gave a reluctant nod. Mom seemed like she wanted to push back, but instead she let out a sigh and slumped in her seat, like something in her had finally given way. By the end, we reached this fragile middle ground. A compromise, I guess you could call it. Mom and Dad agreed to give Claire more space, less pressure about careers and expectations. They also admitted that I wasn't trying to create distance between them and Claire. I could still see some uncertainty in their eyes, but it was something. It was a start. Before they left, Mom pulled me aside. In a low voice, barely above a whisper, she thanked me. She said she didn't love how I went about it, but she could see I'd only wanted to help. It wasn't the warm apology I'd hoped for, but it meant something. Dad gave me the stiff, awkward hug that caught me off guard, but I appreciated it just the same. After they were gone, Claire stayed a little longer. She looked more at ease than I'd seen her in weeks. She told me she was grateful I pushed for the meeting, that I stuck up for her even when it got messy. It wasn't some emotional movie moment, just a simple thank you between two sisters who'd been through the ringer together. But it meant the world to me. As I closed the door behind her that night, I actually felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. No, it wasn't a perfect solution. I knew there were still rough days ahead. But for once, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could move forward as a family without constantly tearing each other down. I figured things would finally settle after that meeting. I thought we might hit a peaceful stretch. But calm doesn't last long in my family. Word of what happened that night spread like wildfire through our extended relatives, and not everyone was thrilled. My aunt, Dad's sister, was the first to reach out. She called me up, hinting that I had overstepped, that I should have just let Mom and Dad handle Claire in their own way. I tried to shrug it off, but the whispers kept popping up every time we had a family get-together. Relatives started pulling me aside with their unsolicited advice. Maybe don't get so involved. It's their job to guide her, not yours. And just like that, the story started shifting. The focus turned to me. Somehow, I became the one who messed everything up. People began saying I'd undermined my parents, that I was the reason Claire seemed so lost lately. It hurt more than I expected. Suddenly, I wasn't just the outsider, I was the scapegoat. Then one evening, just when I felt like the whole family had turned on me, my cousin Jenna called, not my best friend Jenna. This was another Jenna, Dad's niece. We hadn't talked in years, but she'd heard the family gossip and wanted to check in. She told me about her own battles with her parents, how they tried to steer her life until she finally moved across the country to break free. She said it was tough, trying to balance love for your family with the need to protect your own peace. She mentioned how people always seem to aim their frustrations at the one person trying to keep everyone together. It was honestly a relief to hear someone else say it, to know I wasn't alone. Before we hung up, she even brought up something I hadn't considered before: family counseling. At first, I thought it sounded kind of extreme, like something people do when everything's on the verge of collapse. But the more she explained how much it had helped her and her parents, the more the idea started to grow on me. Meanwhile, things with Claire started slipping again. After the meeting, she seemed lighter, like something had shifted. But now she was going quiet again, ignoring texts, brushing off calls. I dropped by her apartment once, hoping we could talk. But she barely said anything, just short replies and excuses about being busy. The more I tried, the more it felt like she was pulling away. I started to worry, not just about her shutting me out, but about whether all this pressure had finally become too much. But she wouldn't open up, wouldn't let me close enough to find out. At the same time, Mom started calling me every day. She kept suggesting I step in again, like I was supposed to snap Claire out of it and steer her back on track. Dad wasn't much different. He told me, flat out, that it was my job as the older sister to make sure Claire didn't screw up her future. It was like the family meeting had never happened. Every conversation with them felt like I was being pulled in two directions, stuck in the middle, trying to keep things balanced without betraying Claire or losing my parents completely. That pressure? It got heavy. So finally, I took Tessa's advice and found a therapist. I figured if I couldn't fix the family, maybe I could at least make sense of my own role in all this. Turns out, the therapist picked up on something fast. She said I'd been acting like the peacekeeper for years, probably longer than I realized. Every time things got heated in the family, I'd step in, smooth things over, try to hold everything together. My therapist didn't just help me see my patterns, she also gave me tools to deal with conflict in healthier ways. Stuff like how to set clear boundaries without feeling like I was letting anyone down or turning my back on them. I didn't realize how badly I'd need those skills until Claire hit her breaking point. It was late one night when I got a text from her. She sounded panicked, asked if she could come over. Of course, I said yes. When she showed up, I barely recognized her. She looked completely drained, like she hadn't had a proper night's sleep in days. The moment she stepped inside, she just collapsed onto the couch and started talking. She told me she felt like she was unraveling, like the constant tug-of-war between trying to meet our parents' expectations and wanting to live her own life was slowly tearing her apart. She broke down right there in front of me. I'd never seen her like that before. She said she didn't know how much longer she could keep juggling it all, everyone's opinions, the judgment, the pressure. Said sometimes she just wanted to disappear so she could finally breathe. We stayed up for hours, just the two of us, talking through it all. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like she really trusted me, not just as her sister, but as someone safe she could lean on. Everything she said that night reminded me so much of how I felt when I first moved out and tried to figure out who I was outside of the family mold. That same mix of guilt and freedom, of love and frustration. After that conversation, I knew I had to try again with our parents, but this time, I went in prepared. I used what I'd been learning in therapy. I kept calm, kept focused, and made it clear that this wasn't about blame, it was about boundaries. I told them that Claire needed the space to make her own choices, even if they didn't always agree with her path. Mom tried to push back, saying she was just doing what was best for Claire, but I didn't budge. I reminded them that this wasn't about control, it was about trust. About letting her find her own way. The real clash came at our next family dinner. It was supposed to be casual, but the tension in the air made that impossible. Things boiled over when Mom made a snide comment about how kids today don't understand real hard work, and Dad chimed in about how Claire should take a page from my book. You could tell they still hadn't let go of the idea that Claire was failing just because she wasn't walking the path they'd chosen for her. But before I could even jump in, Claire stood up. Her face was red, hands clenched, and you could hear the tremble in her voice. She said she was sick of the comparisons, sick of always feeling like she was falling short because she wasn't me. The whole room went still. Our parents were stunned. I'd never seen her speak up like that, not to them. They tried to respond, to explain or maybe justify themselves, but Claire didn't let them talk over her. She told them point blank, if they couldn't respect her choices, then they didn't really care about her happiness. It was raw. It was messy. But it was powerful. For once, she didn't shrink herself to keep the peace. She stood tall and told them how she really felt. And watching her in that moment, I saw a whole new side of her. She was strong. She was done being quiet. And I couldn't have been prouder. After the dust settled, there was still plenty of tension in the room. But underneath all of that, there was something new, relief. Like we'd finally cracked the shell of all those years of pretending everything was fine. It wasn't some perfect, happy ending, but it felt like we were starting to move in a better direction. And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe we really were going to be okay. My parents were clearly shaken by what Claire had said. And even though nothing changed overnight, I started to notice small things. The way they talked to her, just a little more careful, a little more thoughtful. Conversations that used to be minefields started to feel less charged. They were still walking on eggshells, sure, but this time it seemed like they were doing it out of respect, not just fear of another blow-up. A week later, I floated the idea of family counseling during a phone call. Honestly, I didn't expect much. I figured they'd brush it off like before. But to my surprise, they didn't. Mom was hesitant, said she wasn't sure it'd help. But Dad seemed open. He said maybe it could give us a chance to understand each other better. We set up our first session for that weekend. The first appointment? Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. We all sat there in this tiny office with a therapist who was way too chipper for the energy in the room. My parents barely spoke. Claire stared at her lap, avoiding eye contact. I felt like I was stuck trying to hold the whole thing together. But little by little, things shifted. The therapist didn't let anyone off the hook. She asked the hard questions, but in a way that didn't feel confrontational. Slowly, my parents started opening up. They talked about their fears for the future, how they were afraid of losing their connection to Claire. Mom admitted that she felt like the changes in our family were slipping out of her control. Claire was quiet at first, but eventually, she opened up too. She talked about how the pressure made her feel like she was never enough. That no matter what she did, she felt like she was letting someone down. And you know what? For the first time, I saw our parents really hear her. Not just nodding along, but actually listening. By the end of that first session, it still felt a little shaky, but lighter too. Like we'd peeled back a layer and saw each other a little more clearly. It wasn't a cure-all, but it was a solid first step. We kept going to counseling over the next few weeks. It wasn't easy. There were still hard conversations, uncomfortable moments, and a lot of biting tongues. But we started building better habits. The therapist encouraged us to check in regularly to talk about things before they blew up. At first, it felt forced. But slowly, those check-ins became more natural. And outside of the sessions, Claire began to change in a way I hadn't seen before. She started making her own decisions, little ones at first. She signed up for a course that interested her. Took on a part-time job she actually wanted. Not because it fit some success mold our parents had in mind, but because it made her feel alive. I watched her confidence grow with every step. And I made sure I was there for her, not to fix things, but to support her. I'd send her messages to cheer her on, show up when she needed someone to talk to, and keep my opinions in check unless she asked for them. But it wasn't just Claire who was shifting. Mom and Dad, who had always been so locked into their expectations, started softening too. They stopped bringing up careers every time we sat down for dinner. I even caught Dad asking Claire about her new job, and he sounded genuinely interested. One night after a session, Mom pulled Claire aside. She apologized. She told her she realized she'd been pushing too hard. I don't think I've ever seen my mom admit she was wrong like that. The change didn't happen in a flash, but it was real. I could feel it. During one of our sessions, Mom opened up about how strict her own parents had been. How she'd sworn not to raise us the same way, only to realize she'd fallen into the same trap. And Dad confessed something that hit me hard. He said he was afraid of us all drifting apart as we got older. He never said that kind of thing before. I never even knew he felt that way. These conversations weren't easy, but they helped me see my parents in a new light, not just as the people who got it wrong, but as people who were still learning, still trying. Just like the rest of us. They weren't just parents anymore. They were people, with their own worries, their own regrets. And Claire? She seemed to be coming back to life. With the constant pressure finally easing off her shoulders, her energy started to shift. She was laughing again. Making plans with friends. Even talking out loud about some big goals she'd kept on the back burner for years. Her whole spirit seemed lighter. She started stopping by my place just to hang out again, the way we used to before everything got so heavy between us. It was like she was slowly stepping out from under a cloud she'd been trapped in for far too long. And then, word started getting around. Our extended family, the same ones who once took sides and fueled the drama, began to notice the change. My aunt, the one who used to criticize me for meddling, actually picked up the phone one afternoon to say she was glad to hear things were improving. Other relatives who'd once passed judgment were suddenly being kinder, more supportive. Even the gossip that used to buzz at every gathering began to quiet down. It seemed like everyone was starting to understand that every family has its storms, and sometimes the only way out is through. Cousin Jenna, the one who'd encouraged therapy in the first place, became a regular fixture at our dinners. She shared her own stories, little moments from her past that made all of us feel less alone in our mess. Her honesty brought some warmth into the room, helped take the edge off. Our family dinners stopped being obligations and started turning into something more casual, more human. We began building new traditions. Instead of stiff, formal sit-downs, we'd organize game nights, spontaneous cookouts, movie marathons. It wasn't about appearances anymore, it was about being together and actually enjoying it. Of course, there were still slips. Moments when old habits crept back in. But they didn't feel like disasters anymore. They were just human. And for me, that was progress. I spent a lot of time thinking about everything that had changed. For so long, I thought setting boundaries meant putting up walls, but it turns out it's just a way to stop yourself from getting swallowed by the chaos. I'd always tried to carry everyone's emotions, hold the family together by sheer will. But letting go a little, letting people deal with their own stuff, was what finally helped things fall into place. Looking back, I could see a path forming. It wasn't smooth, but it was real. And as I watched Claire find her footing, I felt this quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, we were finally going to be okay. Update 3. A few months after our last therapy session, my parents hosted a full-blown family reunion. First one in years. They invited everyone, cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had watched the whole mess unfold from a distance. It was meant to be a celebration, a kind of reset for all of us. I'll be honest, I was nervous. Curious, too. I wanted to see if the changes we'd made could hold up in a bigger setting. If the progress was real when more eyes were on us. Claire showed up looking more confident than I'd ever seen her. She walked in with her shoulders relaxed, smiling easily, chatting with cousins like it was the most natural thing in the world. Gone was the version of her who used to hang in the background, dodging questions about her life. Now, she spoke openly, talking about the part-time gigs she'd taken, the new courses she was exploring, and even some future plans she was starting to chase. Our aunts and uncles, the same ones who used to whisper about how lost she seemed, were now complimenting her growth. And Claire? She accepted their words with grace, no hesitation. Like she'd finally made peace with who she was becoming. The whole night was filled with laughter, not the forced kind, but the kind that bubbles up when people finally feel safe. We shared old stories from childhood, reminisced about the good times, and even laughed about some of the awkward, cringy family drama we'd survived. Even my parents seemed different. Softer. Like they were finally learning how to let go of control and just let things be. At one point during the evening, Mom pulled me aside. She thanked me. Told me that pushing for therapy had opened her eyes in a way she didn't expect. That she'd come to understand Claire better, and even herself. I didn't expect that. Especially not from her. Dad came over, nodded, and added that he was proud of me for holding our family together when it felt like everything was falling apart. Hearing him say that out loud, in front of others? That moment stayed with me. For so long, I felt like the one tearing the family at the seams. Like every time I tried to help, it only made things worse. But now, hearing them acknowledge the effort I put in, it meant more than they knew. After dinner, Jenna stood up with a glass in her hand. She gave a little toast. Said a few words about how families go through rough patches, but that it's the work and love behind the scenes that make the difference. She mentioned how proud she was of Claire and me, how our story gave her hope for her own relationships. Her voice cracked a little, and by the time she sat down, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. I looked around and saw something I hadn't seen in years: ease. Laughter. People actually enjoying being together without walking on eggshells. And that's when it really hit me, we'd changed. All of us. Claire pulled me aside before the night ended. She was glowing. She told me she was planning to move into her own place soon. Said she was looking into jobs that aligned more with what she loved, and maybe even thinking about going back to school to chase a degree she'd always dreamed about. She was excited, and this time, when she told our parents, they didn't shut her down. Mom offered to help her search for apartments. Dad offered to help with the move. No arguments. No passive-aggressive comments. Just support. It was like watching an entirely new chapter unfold in real time. Later that night, I found a quiet spot to just take it all in. I thought about everything we'd been through. All the late-night fights, the heavy conversations, the moments I wasn't sure we'd come back from. But then I looked at where we were now. My parents had learned to listen. Claire had found her voice. And me? I'd figured out how to stand up for the people I love without losing myself in the process. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some polished story tied up with a bow. But it was real. It was ours. And for the first time in a long, long time, it finally felt like enough. That night, we ended up talking a lot about everything we'd learned through therapy. About how taking the time to really see things from each other's perspective was what got us to this point. The insights from our counselor on listening, empathy, how to have tough conversations without turning them into fights. Those lessons didn't just stay in the office. They bled into the way we interacted at home, too. For the first time in a long while, we were pointing out the good stuff. Sharing the little things we appreciated about one another, things that had been buried under years of frustration, misunderstandings, and hurt feelings. And man, it felt like we were turning the page. We weren't just patching things up anymore. We were writing something new. Instead of getting caught up in what went wrong, we focused on building new memories. Ones that weren't about arguments or guilt, but about laughing together, showing up for each other, and just being a family again. My parents even brought up the idea of starting some new traditions. Like taking turns hosting smaller, low-key dinners at each other's homes, no pressure, no perfect table settings, just food, stories, and time together. It might not sound like much, but it shifted everything. Suddenly, our time together didn't feel like a performance. It felt genuine. I'm not naive. I know there will be more bumps down the road. No family gets a free pass on hard times. But this time around, we're better equipped to face them. We've figured out how to talk without tearing each other down. We've learned how to respect each other's choices, even when they don't line up with what we expected. And we've stopped turning every disagreement into a full-blown power struggle. Before we all left that night, I pulled Claire into a hug. I thanked her for trusting me, for letting me stand beside her, even when it got messy. She hugged me back tight and gave me the soft, real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in years. The kind that told me she was okay now. That we were okay. On the drive home, I kept thinking about everything we'd been through. All the late-night phone calls, the arguments, the awkward silences, the breakthroughs. It had been a long road, rough, painful, and honestly exhausting at times, but it had brought us to something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't weighed down by the past. I was hopeful. Really hopeful. Because even though we'd stumbled and fought and gotten things wrong along the way, we didn't give up on each other. And it was that love and the willingness to understand each other that carried us through the hardest parts. Whatever comes next, I know we can face it together.